Hey, screenwriters. Today I want to talk to you about a quick and easy way for you to develop three-dimensional characters, as well as answer one of your questions about how much backstory a screenwriter should develop before starting to write. So let's get into it. So this video was actually inspired by one of your comments. Sarah Farah asked me how much backstory does she need to develop before she starts to write. And it got me thinking about the two schools of thought about backstory development. The first school of thought says that you should know absolutely everything about your main character. What their favorite color is, what school they went to, what their dog's name was when they were a kid, what their PIN number is to their account. In short, this school of thought believes that there isn't a single detail of your character that you shouldn't know. The second school of thought says that you should only really focus on the details that are pertinent to your story. That's a school of thought that I personally belong to. The strategy here is that you should only focus on the details that are going to help you move the story forward, the details that are essential for you to tell the story that you want to tell. Given the time limitations of film, and even in television, you're only ever really able to convey essential details of your character. The challenge here is then, how do you develop a meaningful backstory for your character while still being able to focus on the essential details necessary to develop a three-dimensional character for your scripts? Over the years, I've developed a shortcut to developing three-dimensional characters as well as developing strong backstories. It's a fast and easy way of doing it that I've been using over the last several years. I call it the 2 triangles method. Like a lot of you, I have a day job. That means that I don't have a lot of time in my day to write. So it's forced me to come up with fast and easy ways to do better writing in shorter amounts of time. One of the ways that I've developed is something that I call the 2 triangles method of character development. It allows me to develop three-dimensional characters with engaging backstories in a short amount of time. Now, there are 2 broad areas of your character that you have to understand and define to successfully tell your story. The first is your character's psychology, the conscious and subconscious drivers of your character's actions. The second is your character's personality, how those conscious and subconscious drivers manifest themselves to the outside world. Once I understand these 2 broad areas of my characters, I can start writing. Now, in this video, I'm going to focus on the psychology triangle. In the next video, I'll focus on the personality triangle. So let's start with the psychology triangle, and I'll show you what I mean. The psychology triangle is made up of 3 parts: your character's wound, your character's wants, and your character's needs. So let's discuss your character's wound so we can fully understand how the psychology triangle works. Most characters enter a story with or soon experience a wound. That wound can be the loss of a parent, the loss of a job, or the murder of a loved one. Whatever it is a devastating event in that character's life. It is a life-changing moment in that character's journey. It is a cataclysmic moment. It's not a minor inconvenience. It's not something that they can just brush off their shoulder and move on with their lives. It is something that fundamentally changes the way they look at the world and the way that they as a human being respond to the world. So for example, in Guardians of the Galaxy, Peter Quill loses his mother to cancer. In Batman watches as his parents are murdered. In Star Wars, Luke Skywalker is already an orphan before the events of the movie, but then loses his uncle and aunt in the first act of A New Hope. Now, from a narrative perspective, ideally, your character's wound is going to be the one thing they struggle with and against throughout your entire narrative. It should be the defining issue of their psychological makeup. It should be the most critical element of your character's psychological profile. But most importantly, your character's wound determines what your character's wants and needs are going to be. So for me, the first thing I need to understand of my character is their wound. I need to know how they were hurt and who hurt them. The minute I understand their wound, I feel I have a much better understanding of where this character is going. So let's talk about wants and needs. Wants and needs are the other 2 elements of a psychological triangle. They are absolutely essential to writing great characters. Your character's wants and needs are ultimately driven by your character's wound, because your character's wound creates an imbalance in their life that forces them to want things that aren't exactly what they need in life. That wound is what helps your character pursue the wants in your story that aren't the needs that they need to heal their wound. Any good narrative, at the end of that third act, at the end of that story, your character's wound is healed. What prevents them from healing that wound is they end up wanting things that they actually don't need. That wound is what creates that imbalance. So now you begin to understand why wants, needs, and wounds are all related. So for example, if your character's wound is the death of loved ones, it may psychologically drive them to want revenge, when what they need is to accept justice. A great example of this is the Marvel Comics book character, the Punisher, someone who spends his entire life wanting to get revenge against the gangsters that murdered his family, when what he actually really needs in order to close that wound is to simply accept the justice system as is. In A Christmas Carol, Scrooge's wound is the miserly childhood he had that put him in a position to want to accumulate wealth as a means of happiness, when what he needs is to have a new relationship with wealth that helps him understand that money is not the defining aspect of happiness and that generosity is. So again, the wound creates a want that isn't the need. The character spends the movie going after the want instead of resolving his need. What your character wants is not what they need. And what they need is often the opposite of what they want. Their need, when they fulfill their need, they actually heal the wound that's been pushing them forward throughout the entire narrative. So for me, an ideal character arc is by the end of the third act of a movie, that character's wound is healed because they finally acknowledge the need that they have that is not the want they've been chasing. Follow me so far? Your character's wound sends them down the path of wanting something. That want is usually the wrong thing. It's by pursuing the wrong thing that they end up discovering what their needs are, what the right thing they need to have in their life is. And the resolution between wants and needs heals the wound. That to me is what a defining character arc is. That to me is a satisfying character arc. And you only get that satisfying character arc by understanding the wound, the wants, and the needs of your characters. It's the resolution, it's the conflict between wants and needs that the majority of your story takes place. It's the character pursuing the wrong wants in life instead of pursuing the right needs in life, which is what Act 2 of your story is going to be. And when you know your character's wound, your character's wants, and your character's needs, you now have everything you need to do to develop a satisfying backstory. So now I can finally answer Sarah Farah's question about how much backstory a writer should start developing before they start writing their screenplay. Your character's backstory doesn't have to be long or complicated. What it has to be is satisfying. It has to explain to the audience the genesis of their wound, and it has to connect the dots between the wounds of your character and the wants of your character. You should spend your time crafting a backstory that helps explain your character's wound and helps explain how, who, where, when, and why that wound developed. But keep in mind, your character's backstory as it relates to your wound should be simple and easy to understand. It should be digestible for an audience. This is why so many characters' wounds are as a result of the death of a loved one, the murder of a loved one. It's simple and it's easy to understand. I understand this character's motivation because they saw their loved one being murdered or their loved one dying. That's the hallmark of a great backstory. It is simple and easy, but most of all, it connects your character's wound with your character's wants. Once you know that event, once you know the who and the why of your character's wound, you can then start exploring ways to reveal it in your story. Is it revealed in the first act of your story? Is it something that's revealed slowly throughout the course of your screenplay? Maybe it doesn't actually appear on screen at all. Personally, for me, I like my character's wounds being explained in Act 1. I like the audience to understand what this movie is about, what the story is about, what this character's wound is, and what this character's wants is. Now, if you know these three things, if you know the wound, the wants, and the needs of your character, I promise you, you are ahead of 90% of the screenwriters writing right now, because many writers don't spend the time to understand this psychological triangle. Developing this psychological triangle will make your characters richer, will make your characters deeper, and will make the entire experience for a reader or a viewer of your work much more enjoyable. Next time, I'm going to dive into the personality triangle and to show you how it relates back to the psychology triangle in terms of developing three-dimensional characters that are rich, that are deep, that are meaningful, and that people connect to. So that's it. That's my part 1 of how to write deep and meaningful characters using my 2 triangles method. If you have any questions, if you have any comments, drop them in the box below. Part 2 is going to be coming soon. Again, part 2 is the personality triangle, so stay tuned for that. Happy writing.